Paul Newman's wife just confessed the sick truth about their bedroom games that Hollywood kept secret for 50 years. You think you know the love story of Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. You're dead wrong. While millions worshiped them as Hollywood's perfect golden couple, behind closed doors, they were living a twisted nightmare that would make your skin crawl. We're talking about violent alcoholic rages where Paul smashed furniture and terrified his kids, secret gay affairs that nearly destroyed their marriage, and hardcore bedroom roleplay that pushed every boundary imaginable. But that's just the beginning. This man was such a terrible father that he basically killed his own son. And now his widow with Alzheimer's has finally spilled secrets that will make you see Paul Newman as the monster he really was. Picture this. It's 1925 in Ohio, and a baby is born into what looks like a nice middle-class family. His dad owns a store, his mom goes to church. Everything seems normal. But inside that house, pure hell is happening every single day. Paul Newman's father was a vicious drunk who terrorized his family like a maniac. Little Paul would hide under his bed when Daddy came home, knowing that furniture was about to fly and screams were about to start. Arthur Newman wasn't just strict. He was cruel in ways that messed up Paul's brain forever. He would slam glasses on tables, scream that Paul was worthless, and tell his son he'd never amount to anything. Can you imagine hearing that garbage every day as a kid? Paul's father basically programmed him to hate himself, and that self-hatred would destroy everything Paul ever touched, including his own children. The psychological damage was so severe that even when Paul became the biggest movie star in America, he still heard his father's voice calling him worthless. He would stand in front of mirrors and smash them because he hated what he saw. At fancy Hollywood parties, while everyone praised him, Paul would drink and mumble that he didn't deserve any of it. His father had poisoned his mind so badly that success felt like a lie he was telling the world. After high school, Paul tried to escape his nightmare childhood by becoming an actor. In 1949, he married a sweet woman named Jackie Witt, who gave him 3 beautiful children. For a few years, it seemed like maybe Paul could build the happy family he never had growing up. Jackie believed in his dreams and supported his struggling acting career. Their kids adored him. Life was finally getting better. But then in 1953, Paul met Joanne Woodward backstage at a theater, and their first meeting was explosive in all the wrong ways. They couldn't stand each other. Joanne thought Paul was boring and fake, while Paul found her loud and obnoxious. They got into screaming matches that left everyone around them uncomfortable. Nobody could have predicted that these two people who hated each other would soon become obsessed with each other in the sickest ways possible. When they were forced to work together on a movie in 1957, something twisted happened. The hatred turned into lust so intense it scared both of them. Paul was still married to Jackie with 3 kids at home, but he couldn't resist Joanne's pull. They started a secret affair that was conducted in cheap hotels and hidden locations, while Paul's wife and children waited for him at home, not knowing Daddy was betraying them in the worst way possible. The affair went on for years, tearing Paul apart inside. He loved the excitement of sneaking around with Joanne, but he hated himself for destroying his first family. Jackie finally found out the truth and was devastated. The woman who had supported Paul's dreams and given him children was thrown away like garbage so he could chase his obsession with Joanne. Paul divorced Jackie in 1958 to marry his mistress, but the guilt ate him alive forever. The wedding should have been happy, but Paul was drowning in shame over what he'd done to his first family. To numb the pain, he started drinking heavily, and that's when the real horror show began. Alcohol turned Paul Newman from America's sweetheart into a violent monster who terrorized his new family, just like his father had terrorized him. The cycle of abuse was repeating itself, and Paul was too weak to stop it. When Paul drank, he became unrecognizable. Joanne described these episodes as living hell. Paul would scream until his voice was gone, punch holes in walls, and throw furniture across rooms while his children hid in terror. The man America loved as a movie star was actually a raging drunk who made his family's life miserable. Paul would wake up the next morning with no memory of his violence, but his wife and kids remembered every terrifying second. This nightmare went on for years. Paul would promise to quit drinking, stay sober for a few weeks, then fall back into the same destructive pattern. His children learned to recognize the warning signs and would hide when Daddy started drinking. Joanne lived in constant fear, never knowing when her charming husband would transform into a screaming maniac who might hurt someone. Finally, Joanne reached her breaking point. In the early 1960s, she made the desperate decision to save herself and the children by running away to Switzerland. She packed up everything and left without warning, refusing to answer Paul's phone calls or letters. For 6 months, she maintained complete silence while Paul fell apart emotionally. Paul was absolutely destroyed by Joanne's abandonment. He flew to Switzerland and spent nights standing outside her hotel like a crazy stalker, pounding on the door and begging her to talk to him. When she wouldn't answer, he would collapse on the steps, crying like a baby, making a complete fool of himself in public. The great Paul Newman was reduced to a pathetic drunk begging for scraps of attention from the woman he had driven away with his violence. The separation forced Paul to face reality in a way he never had before. He realized that alcohol was destroying everything he cared about, and if he didn't get sober, he would lose Joanne forever. The process of quitting was brutal, but Paul's obsession with Joanne gave him the strength to endure withdrawal and commit to staying clean. When Joanne finally agreed to come back, it was with strict rules that Paul had to follow, or she would leave him permanently. But when they reunited, something even more twisted began. With his mind clear from alcohol, Paul's sexual appetite became absolutely insatiable. They were having sex up to 6 times a day, but that wasn't enough for Paul's sick desires. He needed to control every aspect of their intimate life, turning their bedroom into his personal playground for twisted fantasies that pushed every boundary. Joanne later revealed details that shocked everyone who heard them. Paul was obsessed with role-play scenarios where he had complete power over her. He would pretend to be a police officer, judge, or military commander while she played helpless victims. Paul would tie her hands with silk scarves, whisper sick dialogue he made up, and force her into scenarios that lasted for hours. This wasn't normal married couple intimacy. This was one person's need to dominate and control taken to extreme levels. To accommodate these sick games, Paul built what Joanne called the hut in their Beverly Hills mansion. This was a specially designed room with thick red velvet curtains that blocked out all light, soundproof walls, and a bed covered in black silk sheets. It looked like something out of a horror movie, but for Paul and Joanne, it was where their marriage really happened. They would disappear into this room for hours while their children learned to stay away and pretend they didn't hear anything. Joanne admitted that these twisted sessions were what kept their marriage together. When they fought about Paul's drinking, his jealousy, or his terrible parenting, they would go into the hut and transform their anger into sick sexual games. She said that without this outlet, their marriage would have ended years earlier. But what kind of relationship needs that level of twisted behavior just to survive? It sounds more like addiction than love. The children knew something weird was happening, but were too young to understand. When jazz music started playing loudly from the hut, they learned to make themselves scarce. Once a child accidentally knocked on the door and Paul screamed at them to go away, then turned up the music to drown out whatever sick things were happening inside. Those kids grew up thinking this was normal behavior for married couples. But even the most intense sexual obsession couldn't save Paul from his biggest failure as a father. His relationship with his oldest son, Scott, from his first marriage, was a complete disaster from day one. Scott grew up in his famous father's shadow, constantly being compared to a movie star he could never measure up to. The pressure was crushing, and Scott began acting out through drinking and drugs, following the same destructive path his father had walked. Paul tried to help his son, but had no idea how to be a real father. He was either absent on movie sets or overly harsh when he was home, creating a relationship built on conflict instead of love. Scott desperately wanted his father's approval, but only got criticism and disappointment. The distance between them grew until Scott started, telling people that Paul wasn't really his father at all. The tragedy Paul should have seen coming finally happened in 1978, when Scott died from a drug overdose at just 28 years old. Paul was completely destroyed, collapsing over his son's dead body and blaming himself for the death. He knew that if he had been a better father, more understanding and emotionally available, Scott might still be alive. But instead of learning from his mistakes, Paul just added more guilt to his already twisted psychology. Around this time, rumors started spreading about Paul's secret gay affairs that nearly destroyed his marriage to Joanne. Multiple sources claimed that Paul had been having a long-term sexual relationship with a male movie star of equal fame. The affair allegedly started on a film set and continued for months before Joanne found out through anonymous letters that detailed exactly when and where Paul was meeting his male lover. When Joanne confronted Paul with the evidence, he didn't even try to deny it. The fight that followed was so violent that neighbors called police, thinking someone was being murdered. They heard screaming, crashing furniture, Joanne's heartbroken sobs, and Paul's desperate attempts to explain himself. The revelation that her husband was also sleeping with men shattered everything Joanne thought she knew about their marriage. From that point on, Joanne lived in constant anxiety, wondering what other sick secrets Paul was hiding. She questioned his late nights on movie sets and became suspicious of his close friendships with male co-stars. Paul, meanwhile, was torn between his carefully crafted public image as America's perfect gentleman and his private desires that he couldn't understand or control. The stress of living this double life made his drinking and violent behavior even worse. Despite all his success and fame, Paul Newman spent his entire life feeling like a complete fraud. Even when he became one of Hollywood's biggest stars, he never believed he deserved any of it. At glamorous parties surrounded by fans and praise, Paul would drink and mutter that he wasn't good enough for the attention. He constantly compared himself to real actors like Marlon Brando, viewing himself as just a pretty face who got lucky. Paul's self-hatred was so deep that he turned down major movie roles because he didn't think he was talented enough to handle them. On film sets, even when directors praised his work, Paul would go back to his trailer convinced that everyone was lying to make him feel better. He would smash mirrors in his dressing room because he hated looking at himself, seeing only emptiness behind the handsome face that made him famous. This insecurity came directly from his father's psychological abuse, which had convinced little Paul that he was worthless and didn't deserve love. Even as one of the most celebrated actors in history, Paul carried his father's cruel voice in his head, constantly waiting to be exposed as a fake. He wrote in his private journals that he felt like a scarecrow stuffed with straw, fooling everyone but eventually going to be found out. The twisted irony was that Paul's pain and self-doubt actually made him a better actor. His performances had real emotion because they came from genuine suffering. Audiences connected with his characters because they sensed the real struggle underneath. But Paul couldn't see this connection. He only felt his father's disapproval and the certainty that he was lying to the world about who he really was. As Paul got older, his relationship with Joanne became even more intense and complicated. When he wasn't battling his demons with alcohol or secret affairs, Paul could be incredibly loving and affectionate. He would touch Joanne constantly, holding her hand during meals, wrapping his arms around her while she cooked, and finding countless ways to show physical affection throughout each day. Their children remembered these moments of tenderness as proof that their parents really did love each other. Despite all the fighting and weirdness, they witnessed terrible arguments and periods of cold silence, but they also saw genuine connection and commitment that somehow survived decades of abuse, addiction, and betrayal. It wasn't a healthy relationship by any normal standard, but it was real in ways that most Hollywood marriages never achieved. Paul Newman died in 2008 from cancer, leaving Joanne alone with 50 years of complicated memories. The grief was overwhelming, but it got worse when Joanne began developing Alzheimer's disease, which started erasing her mind just when she needed her memories most. As her condition got worse, Joanne forgot many things, but amazingly, her memories of Paul stayed sharp and clear. Even in her confused mental state, Joanne would ask for Paul, wondering where he had gone and when he was coming home. Her family realized that their love had been so powerful and consuming that even devastating brain disease couldn't completely destroy it. The image of the man who had controlled her life for over 50 years was burned so deeply into her mind that nothing could erase it. Today, Joanne's family continues the charitable work that Paul started. using his money and fame to help causes they care about. The Newman's own foundation has donated hundreds of millions of dollars, proving that even someone as twisted and complicated as Paul Newman could do some good in the world. Maybe that's his real legacy. Not the perfect marriage everyone believed in, but the proof that even damaged people can create something meaningful if they try hard enough. The story of Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward destroys every romantic notion about Hollywood love stories. Their relationship was built on betrayal, sustained by twisted sexual games, and nearly destroyed by addiction and violence multiple times. But somehow it lasted 50 years and created something that even Alzheimer's can't completely erase. Paul Newman wasn't a hero or a perfect gentleman. He was a deeply damaged man who hurt everyone he claimed to love, including himself. But maybe that's what made him human. And maybe that's why their story still matters, even after all the ugly truth has finally come out. Don't click away, because the final secret Joanne revealed about Paul's death will absolutely destroy you.